Hello for everyone that's joining. If you could try and join on mute, that would be amazing, just so that we get the best sound quality possible. Lovely. Thank you so much. There are lots of you joining, which I'm delighted to say. So we're just going to let you all in now. So there's going to be a lot of pinging. But as you all join, I'm so delighted for you to be here. If you would like to use the chat to say who you are and maybe why you've come today, that will be great. And it'll start your little conversation going. We are going to keep you on mute, I'm afraid, because there are just so many of you. But you are so welcome today, and do start chatting to each other. You are tuning in from all over the world, which I'm delighted about. And we will just get started in a moment. There's about 70 plus of you to join, so we're just going to get the bulk of you in and set up. Feel free to use the chat. We are recording. And we're going to record and share the recording with everybody that signs up. And so the recording will be, if you do feel that you have to leave to go to another meeting at any point, do not worry, because you will get that recording if you wanted to listen in afterwards to the bit that you've missed. Plus, if there's any colleagues of yours that you think might have enjoyed this event and didn't come to it, do feel free to share. This is about us sharing our wonderful expertise with as many people as we possibly can. I'm also delighted to say that as you're all joining, this is our first webinar of 2025. So I'm really excited. Exactly. Thank you, Misty. We ran so many wonderful webinars last year and I have such fun doing that. So you are my first of 2025 and it feels really good to be in the hot seat. And you're still coming in, but I think because we're up to quite a few, I might actually kick off in a moment and introduce my wonderful guest who's staying quiet for the minute. Okay, I think we've allowed everybody in that's in the waiting room. If we can just try and stay on mute and use the chat, but do feel free to use that chat, introduce yourselves. I'm so delighted that you've all chosen this topic to come to, and I can see that someone's already telling me how passionate they are about DEIB. So please, and Misty, anything that Sally does. What a nice way to start my day. So yeah, do feel free to use that chat and introduce yourselves and network with each other. Feel free to go onto LinkedIn and connect with each other, because if one of the powers that I can bring is just curating you all under these wonderful topics and you're all like-minded people, then do connect with each other, because you're all awesome people and that is why you are part of my community. And Misty, I don't know whether Ali has introduced herself yet. Ali Fisher hasn't introduced herself yet on the call, but I think she's in the room. So do Ali and Misty, do connect. I know that you two will get on well. And anyone else, you're all welcome to connect. And so we, as I said, we are recording. So if you can stay on mute, that would be amazing, just so that we get the best sound quality for the recording. And do feel free to continue to use the chat all the way through. Okay, let's get started. I am so delighted to be here today talking about empowering workforces to be more neuro-inclusive. It is a huge topic and we will desperately try to do it justice in the 1 hour that we've got today, but it is a huge topic. And my colleague here, if we can just move one slide on, Bex Tridgell, is with me here today from Autism Unlimited, who we've partnered with for today. And I'm so delighted that she's been able to join us, because she runs a huge amount of training for Autism Unlimited, which we're going to share with you later on, how you can connect and get into that training, because we won't be able to cover everything today, but we're going to pick on her expertise, and you're welcome to connect with her on LinkedIn or follow her, etc. But Bex, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Sally. Hello, everyone. Thrilled to be here with you all today. So as Sally said, my name is Bex and I'm the Inclusion Training Specialist at Autism Unlimited. And that basically means that I design and deliver training around the topics of autism specifically, but also neurodiversity as a whole. That looks quite different. So I design e-learning courses. I also do things like this. I run webinars, and that can either be for specific companies, so I do sort of in-house training for them, or we also have open webinars that people can sign up to. And then I also do in-person training as well. So either going into organisations, or we host some events ourselves that people can sign up for as individuals. Just to give you an idea of some of the different people I've worked with over the past 12 months, we've worked with the local NHS, we've worked with Dorset Police, we have worked with local education providers, local colleges, we've worked with local charities who wanted to know more about supporting their patients who might be neurodivergent. Just yesterday, I was at a local hotel on Bournemouth seafront, delivering a course to help them support their neurodivergent guests. So a very broad spectrum of people that we work with. We also go in and train HR professionals to help them understand more about neurodiversity and things that they can put in place for their neurodivergent employees.
Fantastic. And we're so honoured to have you with us today, Bex. But I'm also so delighted to hear how many organisations are working with Autism Unlimited, because it's exciting to hear that workplaces are looking to be more neuro-inclusive. So I will briefly introduce myself. I think many people on the call will already know me, but if they don't, my name is Sally Pritchett. I'm a CEO of Something Big and a co-founder 25 years ago of Something Big. Something Big are a creative communications agency. We work with organisations to help them make their workplaces fairer, healthier and happier. And today, of course, more neuro-inclusive, which will make things a lot healthier and happier for a lot of people. So that's what we do as a business. I'm a veteran, that's a good way of saying old, but a veteran of 30 odd years of communication skills. And that's the sort of skill and expertise that I bring to the party. And I think it plays a huge part when it comes to neuro-inclusion. And we're going to touch on that throughout the session. And Bex and I are both going to tell our little personal stories a little bit later on in the call. So with that in mind, I think that one of the first things we're going to sort of give a bit of a shout out to is that there will be people on this call. We've got a lot of people on the call, and I think that we will have a really broad range of experience in exposure to neuroinclusion. So that could be people who are knowing the topic and kind of going, oh, I just know I need to know more about this, but I don't know much yet. And then there'll be people up the other end of the spectrum that are really quite invested in this topic. So if you're quite invested in this topic and you're quite experienced, then maybe grab your cup of tea for the minute. But Bex and I thought what we would start with is a little bit of a sort of setting the scene. So do you want to give us a little bit of a heads up, Bex, on what neurodiversity means?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start right from the beginning, because as Sally said, you know, we have a broad range of knowledge amongst you. So I'm going to start right at the beginning. So neurodiversity itself as a term has only been around for about the last 30 years. And we come to think of neurodiversity now as meaning that we recognise everybody on the planet has their own individual, unique brain, and everybody's brain is going to work differently. What we need to focus on now is people who we would term as being neurodivergent. So this means that they have a brain which works differently to what is considered typical. And this is where we also get the term neurotypical. People can be born neurodivergent, or they can acquire it later in their life. And there are lots of different conditions that we would consider to be neurodivergent. I don't have enough time to tell you about all of them, so I will go through the ones that are probably the most common, the ones you've probably heard of most. So to start with conditions that people would be born with, and conditions that they would have throughout their lifespan, we have autism, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia. We also have things like Tourette syndrome, sensory processing disorder. These are all conditions that are quite common. If we're thinking about acquired neurodivergence, it tends to be where there's been an injury to the brain. So, for example, it could be a physical injury, it could be a stroke, it could be as a result of brain infection, such as encephalitis. So you may find that you have people later in life who acquire their neurodivergence. Current statistics show that about 15 to 20% of the population are neurodivergent. So that's about a fifth of your workforce. So even if you are not aware of anybody in your workforce being neurodivergent, I can guarantee that there will be. They may not even know it themselves yet. Some of you may be aware of recent news reports about many adults who are now seeking diagnosis, particularly in the fields of autism and ADHD. A lot of this has come about due to really improved understanding of what autism and ADHD look like. If we think about when they first were identified as conditions, a lot of the research that was done was on children and boys. So the traditional understanding of autism and ADHD were based on how it presented in young boys. We are now aware that female presentation tends to be greatly different, and we are finding a lot of females who have been living with autism or ADHD, or even both, who have gone for a large part of their lives not being diagnosed. And because of this improved understanding that we now have, a lot of adults are recognizing different characteristics about themselves and realizing that actually they could potentially be autistic or they could have ADHD, and therefore they are seeking a diagnosis. The knock-on effect of this, unfortunately, is that waiting lists have grown phenomenally. I am aware of local waiting lists of up to 5 years to access an assessment. And the question that we have in the workplace is, what do we do with these people who perhaps don't have their diagnosis yet, but they are prevented from accessing it because of the length of time that they have to wait, or because they aren't able to fund a private diagnosis themselves? So this leads me on to thinking about, how important is it to actually have that confirmed diagnosis in order to say that you are a neuroinclusive workplace? Do you need people to be saying, yes, I've been to the doctor and I have X, Y, Z? Or do you just need somebody to say, actually, I'm finding this aspect of my job quite challenging? Some interesting statistics for you. So this was based on a survey done by the University of Birkbeck, is that 79% of employers rely on self-disclosure in order to implement accommodations for their employees. That is a huge percentage. But on the flip side, 65% of neurodivergent employees fear stigma and discrimination as a result of disclosure. So we have a huge problem here where we have employers who are relying on self-disclosure, and we have employees who are fearful of disclosing. And if you are fearful to disclose your neurodivergence, the likelihood of you accessing accommodations which you are entitled to receive obviously decreases. And it's worth saying here as well that, under the Equality Act, it is an employer's legal responsibility to provide reasonable accommodations for their employees. But also, it is just the right thing to do. Whether it's a legal obligation or not, you want your employees to be able to thrive in the workplace. You want them to be able to succeed, because if you have successful colleagues who feel empowered, that's going to have a knock-on effect on the success of your business and the product that you're trying to promote to the outside world. So yeah, just a very, very light touch on neurodiversity there for you.
Oh, Bex, that's an absolutely cracking start. So this is a huge topic, right? And so Top Employer, who's a really well recognized and credible source, have actually put neurodiversity and neuroinclusion as one of their key trends and areas for employers to focus on in 2025. So I'm so proud that here we are on the 10th of Jan and we're already discussing this, and so many of you have joined us. That disclosure and that fear of and stigma is huge, and I think we can just close that gap a teeny bit today, because I think the next slide we're going to go on to is, and what Bex and I thought we would do is start to talk about some of the jargon, some of the words that we use in this space, and some of the myths as well. And I, in the preparation for today, I talk to Bex about when people say, for example, autism, they might think of someone like Rain Man, or they might think of Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang, or something like that. And they immediately think, and when we think of Tourette's, we might think immediately of someone shouting out swear words or something like that. So there are a lot of myths and as well as jargon. So we've just put a few here on the slide, and Bex is going to give us a little bit of a like myth busting session so we can get rid of some of these negative stereotypes.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, so masking. This is a term that originated within the field of autism, but actually we're recognising that it's common across a lot of neurotypes. So masking can be conscious or unconscious, and it is the act of trying to appear less neurodivergent, so suppressing those characteristics that might present you as being neurodivergent, and trying to take on the appearance of being more neurotypical. So it's this idea of trying to camouflage, trying to fit into a world that perhaps doesn't suit you, wasn't created for you, isn't set up for you to succeed in, but one that you want to fit into anyway because you don't want to stand out as being different. It's traditionally seen as more of a female characteristic. However, it's important to remember that a lot of males will mask as well. And masking, I suppose, we could consider as a bit of a barrier to people accessing support for their neurodivergence. You know, if you're going into the workplace and you are either consciously or unconsciously masking your neurodivergence, it's less likely that your colleagues are going to be aware of your challenges. If you do decide to ask for help with something, you might be met with doubt that you actually need the help because they haven't seen it, it's not been evident. And also with masking as well, it requires a huge amount of energy, mental energy in particular, because people are focusing on trying to present themselves in a certain way. So by the time you get to the end of your workday at 5 p.m. or at whatever time you finish, you're going to be so tired and so exhausted that the thought of going home and having any sort of life outside of work becomes really quite difficult to imagine. So one benefit of being more neuro-inclusive is that you would be removing that need for people to mask, and therefore you're going to be getting the best out of them because they're not going to be so concerned with masking. They're going to be less tired, they're going to have more energy, they're going to be feeling safer to be themselves, to ask for the accommodations that they might need. Secondly, we have stimming, and again, this tends to be more associated with autism, but there are many examples of different neurotypes stimming. So stimming is a shortened term for self-stimulatory behaviour, and it can look like many different things. The sort of stereotype of stimming would be somebody flapping their hands or rocking or banging their head, for example. And there are lots of different physical stims that people may have. There are also vocal stims. So it could be something like repeating a sound or repeating the same line of a song over and over. There is also something called mental stimming. So this is a stimming that you wouldn't see and that you wouldn't notice because it all happens internally in the brain. And that can be things like saying rhymes in your head. So you're not saying them out loud, you're just repeating it internally. It can be wordplay, it can be counting, things like that. People may also have audio stims, so they might like to listen to the same things over and over again. And the purpose of stimming, well, there are lots of different reasons why people stim. It's a really good way for people to express emotion. That could be anxiety, but it could also be excitement, it could be happiness, it could be anger. It's a way to express that emotion in a more physical way. Stimming can also be really helpful for people when they're trying to concentrate, when they're trying to focus. And the thing about stimming is that you can control it. So it's different to tics in that sense. You can control stimming, but it's not very healthy to control it. It's not very healthy to hide it, and it's not very healthy to stop yourself from stimming. I've spoken with colleagues who say that when they try and hold their stims in all day, it ends up having a negative impact on their well-being and on their mental health. So trying to create an environment where stimming is accepted, where stimming isn't ridiculed or mocked, is really important. Next, we have sensory. So sensory sensitivity is something that we find does impact a lot of different neurotypes. And again, traditionally, it was seen to be something that was unique to autistic individuals. But we know from quite recent research, actually, that sensory sensitivity impacts people with ADHD, it impacts people with dyslexia, with dyspraxia, many other different neurodivergent conditions. And we find that within the workplace, it can be sensory sensitivity that causes the most issues for people. And everybody who's human will have different sensitivities to different senses. You know, we probably have people on this call now who find very bright lights quite overstimulating. And that doesn't mean that you're neurodivergent. It just means that you have a sensitivity to bright lights, to that visual stimulus. But we do find that neurodivergent people tend to feel these sensitivities more keenly, and they will have a greater impact on them. So, for example, working in an open plan office, if you have audio sensitivity and there's a lot of background noise going on, that's going to impact your ability to focus on the tasks that you need to do. Similarly, we have things like temperature that can impact a person's ability to carry out tasks. I mentioned lighting as well, very strong smells. So if your desk is near a kitchen, for example, or if you're working in an environment that deals with, you know, different chemicals and things like that, that can really have an impact on your ability to function, you know, successfully within your role. Workplace adjustments and workplace accommodations. So this is, well, basically what it says. It's making accommodations for people in order to thrive within their job role. So just as a very basic example, if we think about what I just talked about with sensory sensitivity, if someone's in an open plan office and they're struggling with the background noise that's going on, can you provide things that are going to help with that? So that could be noise cancelling headphones. It could be having sort of break-off rooms that people can use if they need to go and be somewhere that's quieter. It could be providing, you know, earplugs. It could be having a policy that if you are going to be on a long phone call, that you go and find an alternative place in which to do that, so that you are not becoming a distracting element within your workspace. Next, we have unconscious biases. So this is a really interesting one, because I think it's fair to say we all have unconscious bias, and unconscious bias means making judgments or making decisions based on your prior experience or based on thought patterns that you have, but without actually realizing that you are making those judgments or making those decisions. And I think this shows up a lot in the world of neurodiversity and neuroinclusion, in that we have these sort of predetermined ideas of what an autistic person might be like, or what someone with ADHD might be like. And that goes back to what Sally was saying right at the beginning. You know, you might automatically think of Rain Man, or when you talk about ADHD, you might automatically think of a naughty boy at school who can't sit still and is always shouting out. You know, people who have dyspraxia, they're quite often told that they're just really clumsy. And, you know, this feeds into that idea of stereotypes as well. And there's quite a well-known saying within the autism community, which is, if you've met one person with autism, then you've met one person with autism. And I think we can apply that to all different neurotypes as well. We are all unique, we're all individual. Every person on the planet is unique and individual to themselves. And it's exactly the same with neurodivergent people. And yes, we might have some similar characteristics, and we might have similar struggles and similar challenges, and we might have similar strengths as each other. But there is no one size fits all. You cannot say, this colleague is autistic, therefore this is what they need, or this colleague is dyslexic, therefore this is what we need to put in place for them. And it's really important that we move away from that idea that, you know, oh, this is their diagnosis, therefore we must put this in place. You need to get to know the person, you need to get to know the individual. And these adjustments and these accommodations that we make for people need to be tailored to the individual.
Brilliant. And Bex, this is so I'm sure if this was a real room, we could hear a pin drop, because everybody is so intently listening to you. So I'm going, yeah, this is gold, exactly, as somebody has just said on the chat. So I'm going to bring this to life for us a little bit by Bex and I now sharing not just what our job titles are, but a little bit of our story about why we're here. And I think I'm going to go first, just so that Bex can take a breath, because she's done some really great talking. I'm very passionate about this subject. If you'd have asked me 15 years ago if I was passionate about this subject, I would have said no, because I didn't know anything about it. So my journey, I have 3 children. They're all growing up very fast and well. But it was not until my first child started to experience Tourette's and tics, and that soon moved into other areas, that we started our journey as a family on neurodiversity. And what I can say to you now is I am an adult diagnosed ADHD. I think I actually have quite high levels of ADHD, and I really recognize that masking that you're talking about here, because it is exhausting for me to manage my impulse control. Even today on this call, where I feel safe and we're all talking about things, of course, I want to interrupt all the time. And anyone that's worked with me will know I'm when I'm safe and comfortable with the people around me, I interrupt a lot, because I have very little control of my impulse control. So to sit quiet and patiently wait for my turn is really hard for me as an ADHD person. So across my family, my 3 children and my husband, we have ADHD, we have Tourette's, we have OCD, we have ODD, we have a lot of high levels of anxiety, and dyslexia, and probably a few more extra things that I haven't mentioned. But it has meant that the last 10 to 15 years, I have got very passionate about how big this community of neurodiversity is, versus how little we talk about it, how little we understand it in the wider community, which is why we're here today. So that's a little bit about my story. And Bex, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, so I am also a late diagnosed neurodivergent person, and in my case, I have autism. I'm autistic, and I got my diagnosis about 2 years ago. However, I have suspected that I was autistic for much longer than that. Probably from about the age of 15, I realised that I was different to my peers, and I didn't really understand why. I spent a huge part of my life feeling like I didn't fit in, feeling like I had to try so much harder than everybody else did. And I didn't seek a diagnosis earlier because I think I had my own unconscious bias about what autism was and my idea of what it meant to be autistic. And even though I knew that I met quite a lot of the criteria that was needed, I thought other people wouldn't take me seriously. I thought if I went to the GP, I would be turned away or I'd be laughed at because, firstly, I'm a woman. Secondly, I've got a degree. I had a successful career. I was married, I had a family, and all of these things. Traditionally and stereotypically, you wouldn't think of an autistic person as having or being. So that was my own barrier to getting a diagnosis. But, I think it's important to reflect on my life pre-diagnosis and my life post-diagnosis because it has had a huge impact on me. And before my diagnosis, I suffered in silence. I was masking, I was exhausted, and I was being criticised within my work. So, for example, when I was in meetings, because it takes me a little bit longer to process information, I felt very put on the spot when I was asked questions, and I didn't feel like I was able to present as my best self. I would quite often get really good ideas after the meeting had finished. So I was really concerned that I was coming across as somebody who wasn't engaging very well, somebody who wasn't really contributing. As an autistic person as well, I need time on my own throughout the day because too much social interaction is really tiring for me. So I wouldn't go and sit with colleagues at lunchtimes. And I was questioned about whether I was a team player because I wasn't going and taking part in those lunchtime, free time social activities. And also as well, I like to observe a lot of the time because that's what I need to do in order to feel safe, in order to know how I should be acting around people. So I come across as quite quiet and quite shy and quite reserved, and people would perceive that as a lack of confidence, and they would make assumptions about me and about my capabilities. Whereas actually, I can be a very confident person. I can stand up in front of 200 people and I can talk to a room and I can do things like this, where I'm talking to people who I've never met before. I'm telling you quite personal things about myself. It's not a lack of confidence, but it's very much me doing what I need to do in order to thrive within the workplace. And post-diagnosis, I have felt so much more empowered to ask for the things that I need and to explain why I need them if I need to explain. And actually, when the people around me know that I'm autistic and when they know that when I'm asking for things, it's not because I'm trying to be difficult and it's not because I think I'm special and I deserve different things, but it's actually to make sure that I can do the best job possible, because we all want to succeed, right? We all want to feel like we're doing our best. So having that understanding has made a huge difference for me, and it's made a huge difference for how I feel about coming to work and my well-being and my mental health. And all of those things have improved so much since having that validation.
Bex, I know that everybody that's listening, I can hear and I can see in the chat that this is resonating. And I think the more that we bring this human story to it, the more that people are understanding that this is not just about the words, this is about the humanity of this. And thank you for the little hearts there coming up. And I really resonate with this exhaustion that sometimes you have felt in the past and being misunderstood. And I thought I'd just share one little thing before we move on to the next sort of key topic. But one thing that people who work with me on a daily basis will not suspect happens is they will see me all day long being super energetic, super excitable. I've often been referred to as Tigger, Tigger on speed, in fact, I've been called. And often people will say things to me like, God, I just want whatever she had for breakfast and things like that. What they don't see, and I think this is what is really interesting for people to understand when it comes to the workplace, is sometimes the thing that they don't see is that sometimes when I get home, my family see a very different side. They see what I call zombie, because physically it is exhausting being ADHD. And so we go into a sort of zombie phase as well, where I can sometimes describe this as a bit like I'm an old-fashioned light switch that has an on and off, but I don't have a dimmer. And so there is no in between. I'm either leading the charge, super excitable, or I'm completely lying on the sofa looking into like space. And unfortunately for my family, they will often see that zombie side more than they might see the wonderful side that I'm excitable and whatever in the workplace. So that's another thing for people to understand about how this is showing up in terms of our workplaces. So I hope that we are really getting into this topic. I'm conscious of time, and the big question we want to ask ourselves now is the workplace. What is happening when we bring all of this experience? And we're talking 1 in 5, 1 in 6 of our workforce who are experiencing what Bex and I are experiencing. So what does this mean typically in the workplace, Bex?
Well, firstly, I really want to focus on the strengths that neurodivergent people can bring to the workplace, because quite often when we talk about neuroinclusion, it very much focuses on the challenges and the support that a neurodivergent person might need. But I want to start by talking about the benefits that neurodivergent people can bring. And these are just some of the strengths that have been self-identified by neurodivergent people. So fairness, hyperfocus, empathy, creativity, innovative thinking, critical analysis, detail processing, all of these things that a neurodivergent person can bring to the workplace that can have real benefit on your organisation. But the best way and the only way to harness those strengths is to put support in where there are challenges. And unfortunately, I've heard so many stories about workplaces that are getting it wrong. We hear about sort of frustration and tension that comes up between sort of neurodivergent and neurotypical colleagues. We hear about, lack of understanding, lack of awareness, and how this can cause friction when managers are trying to manage employees who are neurodivergent and they haven't got that understanding, which kind of leads to this sort of micromanagement. And neurodivergent employees feeling like they're useless, feeling like they're not appreciated, like they're not able to do their job properly. And of course, this is going to lead to, performance-related issues. It's going to lead to perhaps absence as a result of poor mental health that comes as a result of this. And also, we know that the neurodivergent community are more at risk of not staying in a position long term. So again, some statistics from research done by the University of Birkbeck found that 43% of neurodivergent employees that participated were likely to leave their job within the next 12 months. That's nearly half of neurodivergent employees. However, that number became greatly reduced if there were adjustments put in place, and even more reduced if those adjustments were tailored to the individual. So not only are you going to be reducing turnover in terms of your employees, but you're also going to be getting loyalty from them. You're going to be getting the strengths that they bring. You're going to be getting people who feel valued in their workplace, and as a result, they're going to be showing up and trying hard and wanting to do everything they can because they feel valued and they feel that, most importantly, that they've been heard and listened to.
Brilliant, Bex. I've seen a couple of questions come up in the chat that I think are really great, and rather than wait until the end, I'm not going to put you on the spot, Bex, because I already have some responses to a couple of these questions. So I'm happy to go with my response first, and then over to you, Bex. But I think they are really great topics of discussion. So one, I think Lucy has asked us around how do we get disclosure up? Because I guess the sentiment here is it's difficult to put accommodations and adjustments in place if we don't know. And I hear that loud and clear. Now, in my business, and obviously I'm running a smaller business with sort of a group of people who will all know me as the CEO. So therefore, that can mean that they are closer to senior leadership. But I think this can work really well is I disclosed my own neurodiversity, and we from that made an effort we have an ERG group, if you like, who I'm not on because I'm the CEO. So although I am neurodiverse, I don't join that group because I need it to be a psychologically safe place for people to be able to join it without any kind of disclosure. That has enabled a community of people that have different, they might have a diagnosis, they might not have a diagnosis, they might be suspecting that they've got questions themselves. It has enabled them to build a community amongst themselves to learn from each other. But that and my own sort of vulnerability to share my story with our organisation has meant our disclosure levels are very high because we are open and honest about the topic and we're talking about it. Now, if I think about an organisation, many of the organisations we work with have thousands of staff. And I think that disclosure feels quite career limiting. And we haven't talked about it yet, but I know Bex and I talk about executive function. So if you were to sometimes say, well, my diagnosis might mean that I'm not very good at organising myself. I'm not very good at, some of the day-to-day tasks that it takes to be good at my job. Nobody wants to disclose that because they're thinking, well, what would that say to my boss? What if they felt like I wasn't going to be good at my job? So I think we really need to make disclosure less of an issue and say, actually, the point is we all work differently, regardless of your diagnosis, regardless of disclosure, regardless of anything. It's important that these accommodations and adjustments will actually benefit everyone. And if we make adjustments open to everyone and a normalizing of them, then we can all perform better. But I'm very happy to hear, Bex, what you think about disclosure.
I absolutely agree with what you just said, Sally, completely. It's not about I have this diagnosis, therefore I'm entitled to this. It's about these are my strengths and these are my challenges. And if you want my strengths, I'm going to need some support with my challenges, regardless of whether you're autistic, ADHD, have dyslexia, or whether you're neurotypical. We all need to feel like we can succeed within the workplace. And it really does come down to that culture. It's that culture where people feel safe, where people can have conversations like this. And, it's about not being scared as well. I think quite a lot of employers are scared of getting it wrong. And if you can show that sort of humility and that vulnerability and say, look, I don't know what this is like for you. Please tell me about it. That's going to go a long, long way. Sharing personal stories like you and I have done today as well. It shows that it's safe for other people to do that too. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said, Sally.
And Bex, we've got another one that's controversial, and I have a real bugbear about this one, so I can't wait to actually answer it. So Bex, this conversation has come up from Donna, and Ursula, I'm going to speak to your answer as well in the chat, which is that well, maybe we're all on the spectrum, and I get this a lot, right? So one of my members of the family is OCD, and one of my bugbears is when I hear people saying, oh, well, I'm a bit OCD about, right? And I'm going to come on to this. And then another thing I hear is, oh, I'm a bit hyper light. I'm a bit hyper today or something like that. Okay, so where I come from on this, and hopefully, Bex, you're on the same page, maybe or maybe not, there is a spectrum. Are we all in the same boat here? No, I don't believe so. And here's my reason why. There's a difference between I'm hyper today and I'm hyper every day. There's a difference between I'm a bit OCD, but if I was running late, I could leave my house without checking the light switch 14 times or doing this or doing whatever it is. I could overcome it and just not do it. So in my family, OCD is not something we turn on and off. It is something that is ever present, and it can be an enemy. It can be something we really don't want to do, and it is getting in the way. It is a barrier to things that we want to do. So for me, masking, which is exhausting, and being this energetic every day isn't something I turn on and off. It is something I live with every single day. And I think why I feel so passionately about are we all neurodivergent? No, we're not. I feel so passionately because when I first was sort of semi-diagnosed, by the way that happened was my son's doctor said, "So what medication are you taking for your ADHD?" And that's how I learnt about my ADHD. But for a few years at that point, I wanted to deny that I was ADHD. I wanted to say, no, 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 he's got that wrong. And after a while, I had to realize, no, this isn't something I can dial up and down. It isn't something that when I want to just not be neurodivergent, I can just not be neurodivergent. I'm not neurotypical. And I've had to go on my own personal journey to realize that not everybody is the same as me. And so I would say, no, we're not all the same. We're not all neurodivergent. But Bex, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree, and I tend to challenge people who say that in a kind and supportive way, because I think a lot of the time people say that because they're trying to make me feel better. They want me to feel included. They want me to feel like I'm not different. But actually, it's having the opposite effect, and it's actually making me feel invalidated. So I will, explain it very kindly to them in much the same way that you have, and say, it's not impacting your life to an extent where you can't do this or you can't do that. But also, I find that sometimes people will say that because they are actually undiagnosed themselves. So I think it's really interesting to try and explore it with that person, if you have that sort of relationship with them and if they're open to discussing it. But yeah, it's an interesting one, definitely.
I think that's a really interesting reframe of that, Bex, which is that maybe it's coming from a place of, oh, I think I'm like that too. Well, yeah, maybe there is. I certainly know people who I don't think recognize ADHD in themselves. I hope she's not listening today, but my mother would be one of those people who can't recognize it in herself at all. So when my son was diagnosed with ADHD, I went to my mother to say, was I a bit like this, and this when I was a child? And she couldn't recognize that. She couldn't recognize the difference. So I came back to my husband and said, oh, I don't think I was ADHD because my mum didn't recognize it. And he just looked at me and went, have you looked at your mum? And that was when I kind of started to kind of penny drop. So yeah, I think there's a lot going on there. I've derailed us a bit with some questions, but my next question, and I'm appreciating that we're going to run out of time, is the sort of challenges you hear from neurodiverse people and how they're feeling in the workplace, Bex. What sorts of things are they saying?
Yeah, so I get a lot of people telling me that they feel like they're quite misunderstood. Um, they they're not being set up to succeed. And a lot of that is to do with, like I mentioned earlier, that fear of stigma, that fear of discrimination that might happen if they ask for help. I hear so many cases of people who are suffering from burnout, because they are trying so hard to, fit into the culture within their workplace. They're trying to do the job that they've been employed to do, and actually it might not fit their strengths, it might not fit their skill set. So, we get this occurrence of, a bit of square peg in a round hole happening. And I think it's really interesting to think about job design, and do we actually need to try and mold the person into the job, or should we be designing the job around the person? And how beneficial would that be if that's how things were operating? And I know that's, a breakaway from tradition, and, this person has left their post, so we need to find somebody to do exactly the same job that they've just done. Well, what's the likelihood that you're going to find a carbon copy of that person to come in and do exactly the same job that they've just done? Can you look at how that job is designed? Can you look at whether certain aspects of it can be allocated to other people, etc.? We've talked quite a lot about that unconscious bias and stereotypes and how people can be perceived. So, if somebody has challenges with their organisation, or they have challenges with their working memory, they might be perceived as being lazy or not paying attention. Being autistic, sometimes I am quite blunt in what I say. I'm quite direct. I'm not trying to be rude. It's just the way that I communicate. My social skills are going to vary greatly depending on how much energy I've already used up that day. So there can be days when I'm really bubbly and chatty and I want to talk about everything, and other days where I will go and sit in the corner, I'll have the grumpiest face on, and people will be like, what is wrong with Bex? It's like, my social battery is just completely depleted. Doesn't mean that I'm, in a grump with you, doesn't mean that I hate you. It just means I'm trying to charge myself back up again. So, all of these things are challenges that people face as well. Trying to actually get into the workplace as well, trying to access employment can be a real challenge. Thinking about traditional interview processes, they are not neurodivergent friendly. There was a review done into sort of autism and employment that found that only 30% of diagnosed autistic adults are in any kind of paid employment, which is just mind-boggling to me, because, I think back to all those strengths that I listed earlier. Part of the problem with particularly autistic people trying to access employment is getting through the interview process. I have had feedback personally where I was told that I had the best performance in the skills task that was set, which was directly related to the job role I would be doing, but they found that I was a bit flat in my interview, and that's why I didn't get the job. And I thought, hang on a minute, you've just told me I was the best person at the skills that I'm going to be required to show during my job, but because I, perhaps wasn't giving you eye contact all the time, and I wasn't, bubbly and effusive and being really sociable, that's why you don't want to employ me, which is really disheartening, actually. And I then had to put extra effort into masking throughout an interview, whilst also thinking, I'm not really being my authentic self here. So what's going to happen when I get into this job and you discover the real Bex? So yeah, varied challenges that are going on. Yeah.
Huge. And I can really relate to that recruitment one. So in my family, we have Tourette's. Try doing telephone interviews with someone with Tourette's. It's a situation and a stress point that doesn't need to be there, because the Tourette's will accentuate during and exaggerate during that process, and you will not get to see the true person. I knew we would run out of time because we've got so much to talk about, but I've seen, Bex, your comment about medication shortages, and we definitely won't have time to discuss medication to a great degree, but I would say it is really important for employers to understand that medication is an option. It is very much a choice for each individual. Some of my family are medicated and some of us are not. I have not chosen to take medication. But it is also important for employers to know that there has been a national, possibly international, shortage of critical ADHD and other neurodiverse medications. There are a number of medications and many of them are in shortage, probably because of manufacturing issues, but also the sheer volume of people requiring and wanting medication. Now, this is actually very stressful in my family, because if you are reliant on medication and then suddenly you're doing A-levels and there's no medication and you can't concentrate, then this is a real problem. So good for employers to know that medication is not the answer. It is a personal choice, but also that there are shortages, so there could be problems. You've got to make it psychologically safe for somebody to be able to tell you, hey, listen, I'm on medication and it's run out. So psychological safety here is probably a key point across the board. So listen, we have a few minutes left, and I think we're going to have to jump to our one wish, Bex, because I think one of the things that I thought we would end up with is what would be our one wish for employers. So Bex, over to you.
Really, my one wish, and this is where I think neuroinclusion needs to start before you even think about accommodations and all of that, is better awareness and better understanding. Because it's no good saying we can do this, we can put all of this in place if you don't understand, firstly, the experience that somebody may be having, and also secondly, how what you do is going to help support them. And this is what I do every day. I go out into workplaces, I talk to lots of different organisations and charities and volunteer organisations, because increasing understanding is the first step to increased rates of disclosure, employee retention, better outcomes in terms of performance, which is going to have an impact on the success of your organisation and your business. So for me, that is my wish. I wish that everybody who works with anybody has a better understanding of neurodiversity.
Yeah, brilliant. And I'm very close to that, in the sense that as a communications sort of expert, but also just a passionate believer that communication can bring so much good in the world, my wish is for more and better communication around this topic. And I kind of want to mirror a little bit of the conversations that I've been having about mental health. And I think perhaps triggered a little bit by pandemic, those conversations started to be more vulnerable, more authentic. It's okay to not be okay. And we started to have these phrases, these conversations. And I think what we've done over the last 5 years is we've really destigmatized the idea and concept that poor mental health exists, and we've surfaced that conversation. Now, given that neurodiversity impacts absolutely every one of us, because at least one person in our families, in our workplace teams, etc., is likely to be neurodiverse, whether they know it or not, I think it does impact everyone. We're all working with, or love, or friends with, or married to somebody who is neurodivergent, or we are neurodivergent ourselves. So I think it is time, just like we all said, we all have mental health. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. I think we all need to go, we all are associated and are working with or close to neurodivergence. And therefore, we all need to better understand it and have more safe conversations. I think that's my one wish. On that note, I know we're probably going to have more questions, and maybe if Bex is up for it, we will stay online for a few minutes afterwards. I think we definitely need to give you an opportunity to carry on these conversations with Bex or I. So feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. I think if we change the slide, I'm just going to point out that there is more training available with the wonderful Bex with Autism Unlimited. So to find out more about that, please do go to this QR code and go and sign up They have a wonderful LinkedIn group as well that you can follow, and then you can get far more, because we can't do this in 1 hour. But I think, yeah, please do go and get more training for your teams. It's incredibly important that we all understand this better. And I guess, we can sort of, if you want to use an emoji, please do. But I think give Bex a huge thank you for today, because you've been so incredible, the way you have slowly and considered and so thoughtfully taken us through this quite difficult topic. Look at all those emojis. You can think of that, Bex, as an enormous round of applause. I'm going to take that as a standing ovation. That looks to me like a standing ovation.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sally. Honestly, like, any opportunity to get the message out there, I will grab it with both hands. So thank you.
Absolutely. And here's to all of us neurodivergents being better understood and less masking. I can see that there were many people that resonated with our stories in the chat. So I think we'll close and we'll stop recording, I think, and then we will stay on the line for a couple of minutes if people want to ask us some questions. And then, once we've stopped recording, I think you could probably come off mute. And feel free to either put your hand up or just come off mute and have a little chat with us if you like. I don't know what I'm opening our doors to, Bex.
No.
But thank you so much.